All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. So today we're kind of kicking off the Hemlock Willia Winter Mapping Challenge for its second year. First year was last year. So I'm Mitchell O'Neill. I work for the New York Natural Heritage Program. I help administer iMapInvasives for the state. And today we also have with us um, Carolyn Marschner from the Hemlock Initiative, who will be speaking in just a moment. And we also have Megan Pistolese from the St. Lawrence and Eastern Lake Ontario Prism. And so basically we're gathered here today to learn about Hemlock Willia. It's this invasive pest that is spreading through New York, and it threatens hemlock trees, which are a very important part of our forests here in New York, which Carolyn will talk about later. And so for the second year in a row, we've started this mapping challenge to try to get more eyes on the ground across the state, get volunteers out there and checking hemlock trees for this invasive pest to kind of bolster our monitoring efforts in the state. So the way we're kind of structuring today's webinar is Carolyn Marschner is going to talk about hemlocks and why they're important and what this HWA thing is and why that's a problem and what we can do about it. And hopefully that'll motivate us all to get out there and participate in the challenge. So then I'll talk about how the challenge works, what you could win, how to win, and also I want to spend a couple minutes connecting people to the volunteer opportunities in their region. So I'll do a brief run through of the volunteer opportunities across the state. And Megan Pistolese is going to take over for the part about the volunteer opportunities in her region, in the kind of northeastern New York region. And then we'll finish it off with how to use iMapInvasives. So first up, we have Carolyn Marschner's presentation on Hemlock Willia and hemlock trees. So I will pass the control over to her. So just give us a second for that.
Thank you so much for joining us. I work for the New York State Hemlock Initiative at Cornell University. Most of my colleagues have the wonderful opportunity to do research to work on biocontrol solutions for Hemlock Willia, and I am lucky enough to be the one who gets to do outreach. So, why do we care about hemlocks? I don't know. We advance the slide. There we go. Hemlock trees are what we call a foundation species. They are about the fourth most common tree in New York, which might be a surprise if you live, for instance, in the Lake Plain region, where when you look at this map, you can see there aren't so many hemlocks. But you would not be surprised if you live in Lake George or Tug Hill or a lot of the southern tier and the Catskills. Hemlock trees fill a particular niche in that they are only shade-adapted conifer. So those little needles are great at photosynthesizing even under very low light conditions. And for that reason, they grow a lot on north-facing slopes and in ravines and stream sides and other shady areas. They also support our aquatic ecosystems by providing an even stream flow because they transpire at different times of year from our hardwood trees, and they also help keep the water cool through several mechanisms, which is great for fish like our beloved brook trout. And what we don't want to see happen is this, where we lose all of our hemlocks out of our forests. This is Pisgah National Forest in the southern Appalachian region, and they have already had a lot of mortality due to Hemlock Willia. It is an invasive forest pest in our area being on the East Coast. This is what it looks like. What you see are these white, waxy, woolly bundles that are on the twig at the base of the needles. inside those white woolly bundles is this character, which is an adelgid with all the wool stripped away and looked at under a very powerful microscope. This little straw-like thing that you see on the bottom left is its mouth parts that it puts into the tree, and it sucks starches out of the tree. And we think that what actually kills the trees is that the tree walls off the wounds that are made by all of these adelgids going into the tree. And when you have that many of them, it makes it hard to get your sap out to the end of the branches to make new growth. And so the inability to make new growth, we think, is what's killing our hemlocks. Hemlocks die very quickly in the south, in 4 to 10 years. Up north, it's taking longer because our winters are colder, and that the HWA gets knocked back in the winter. This is where HWA is so far. It started where you see it says first discovered 1951, down in Virginia, and it's been spreading since then. In New York, started in the 1980s down in the city area, and then moved its way north through the lower Hudson. It was identified in the Catskills and in the Finger Lakes. And actually also there were separate infestations at about this time, in the 90s and early aughts, also in Rochester and Buffalo from infected nursery stock. It's just kept going, and it's been now in the Lake George region and found in the eastern Lake Ontario region, and it's becoming much more common in Western New York as well. So this bug, to give you a little bit of background, this bug reproduces asexually in North America. There's actually 5 different generations that can happen with Hemlock woolly adelgid, but it does 3 of those generations on a spruce tree that is only found in Asia. And so what we have here are the 2 entirely female generations that happen on hemlocks. So one insect can start a new infestation. 2 generations a year. One that does a summer version of hibernation called estivation over the summer, and then grows during the winter and lays its eggs in the spring, late winter, early spring, and then the other generation that is only during the spring. It doesn't do any of the estivating, it just immediately develops to adulthood and lays the generation for the following overwintering generation. When they first hatch from their eggs, they are these crawlers. This is the only mobile phase. You can see they're super, super small. Once they put their mouth parts into a tree, they are done moving for the rest of their lives. So this is the time that you need to worry about spreading them from one place to another. They are small enough to blow on the wind. They also get transported on birds and animals, and of course they get infested on infested nursery stock. In the winter and spring, they are feeding and growing and producing this wool that we think protects them and their eggs from desiccation and from extreme temperatures. And the wool is what's easy to see when you're out looking for them. Each adult, all female, lay somewhere between 50 to 100 eggs. So if you think about that, you've got all of your adults reproducing asexually, so any one survivor or any one arriving insect can start a new infestation. 2 generations a year, 2 opportunities for exponential growth, and no native predators in our region. And that's why we're having this out of control populations that are killing. To manage HWA, there are 2 options: the short-term option, which is chemical management, and the long-term option, which is probably going to be biological control. Treating your trees now keeps them alive and prevents all of the changes that happen when you lose all of your hemlocks on the landscape, which is what's been happening in the South. And biological control is a good solution for the long term, because once you get a biological control established, then it's out there in the landscape controlling your pest all across the region and without any additional input from you, which is great. But it's a very long process to get the permitting in line and do the research to make sure that the biological control is a safe thing to bring into your area, do the research to see if it's going to work. And even after that, you have to release enough and then let the populations build up enough that they can do that long-term control. So they're not going to save the trees that are infested now. It just takes too long to get that whole process completed. So if you have trees and they're infested now, short-term solution is to treat for HWA. Now, what's the best time to look for HWA? This is the life cycle with the 2 generations, and on the inside you can see the months of the year. Take out the area in the summer when they are so tiny you can barely see them, as you can see on that photo in the left. Take out hunting season and the time when there are crawlers active on the landscape, and what you've got is winter and early spring. That is the best time to survey. You can look at any time of year, especially if you're in an area that already has HWA, because the wool sticks around, but finding new infestations in the summer is really hard. To survey for HWA, what you're doing is you're looking for HWA presence and absence and reporting how much HWA you found. And if you want to go up to the next level, you can also report what kind of hemlock resources you found, which is also really useful. When you're out there, this is a great time, November through May, and hunting season's over, so now is a good time to get out. Look for trees that don't look so good. Survey all the trees, but focus your attention if you see stands that have not a lot of foliage, and the branches that are left still have the fine branchlets on the edge. That's a good sign that you've got a tree that might have HWA. In our winter storms, we often get branches from the top of the tree that fall down to the ground, which is an awesome way to find out what's happening in the top of that tree. So going out after a storm and using those branches to survey is really useful. Porcupines also get up there and nibble on the tops of the trees, and they drop branches too. So you can find branches down a lot of the winter, but after a storm, it's usually extra good. Survey the branches you can reach, and it's a great idea to go out with a ski pole or a hook or something that you can use to pull down some branches so you can look a little bit higher in the tree. Look at the underside of the twig. Unless the populations are very high, mostly the HWA are settling on the underside of the twig where they're protected from precipitation. And check branches on all sides of the tree. You saw how small those crawlers are. Where they wind up is pretty random, and so you can have a big infestation on one side of the tree and a very light infestation on the other side. If you're looking at these, which one is the hemlock? That one's a fir. It's got that narrow, upright, very dense form. That one's a spruce. Same very upright form, but a little looser with wider branches. And then the ornamental ones, some of them droop straight down. I'm sure you've got those in your neighborhoods. This one, with the delicate branches and the frondy foliage and the drooping tips, that's the eastern hemlock. Check out your hemlock health. That tree on the left, that is a sick tree. Look at that very thin crown. Over here, these are healthy hemlocks, and that's one of our gray ghosts, an HWA impacted hemlock. Those trees are like the one on the right here that are starting to look gray because they just can't get any new foliage out and their old needles are getting old. Lollipop damage is another thing that we see where the foliage is being dropped from the bottom up and all that's left is a little tuft at the top of the tree. And then what does HWA look like? Over here on the left, you've got healthy hemlock. If you look at the leftmost photo there, you can see those little white white things, those are not HWA. That's just what's called the peg. It's like the little petiole at the bottom of the needle. Right, this is HWA. A light infestation on the lower photo and then a heavier infestation up top. We're looking, at least the lower one is a photo of the underside of the branch again. Things that might look like HWA but aren't. Along at hemlock scale, you can see a bunch of white stuff on these branches and brown stuff, but this is a different invasive. Please report it if you see it, but note the white stuff is on the needles, not on the twig at the base of the needles. Hemlock and needle miner, you'll see this in our woods a lot. You'll see a little clump of curled over brown needles with some white stuff inside. That's a moth, and it's not a problem pest. You don't need to worry about those. Lots of spider egg sacs are white, but they tend not to be on the twig at the base of the needle, and they tend to be more silken in texture instead of that woolly, cottony look. Spittlebug foam, also white, often on the twigs, but bigger and, foamy and not woolly. And then skeletonizer, you'll see the cocoons for this on the needles. Again, not on the twig. So that's what you're looking for. Where do you want to look? You can look anywhere you want, anywhere you are. We love reports on HWA. But if you happen to be able to get to one of these blue areas, we don't know what's going on in these areas. These are areas where we don't have a lot of survey, or we haven't had a positive yet, and we're expecting a positive soon. So if you live near one of those, we would love it if you could get out and look in some of these areas. So get out and survey now. Treatment is the only way to keep our currently infested trees alive. In the long term, we're hoping that biological control will keep the eastern and the Carolina hemlock on our landscape into the future. That's all I've got. If you want to know more, we've got a bunch of information on management and how to think about what trees to treat at our website there, Facebook and Instagram. And I thought you could also email us, but I think that I'm done.
Great, thanks so much, Carrie. If anybody has any questions, please enter those into the chat box. I'll look at that for a second here to see if anyone has any questions. So you should see a little speech bubble kind of towards the bottom of your screen if you're looking for that. And you can use that to enter in any questions whenever you like throughout the webinar. So right now, I am not seeing any questions. So just feel free to enter your questions whenever you want, but I'll move on for now. And I'll check back on the chat box and we can go through questions about HWA, about hemlocks, about IMAP, whatever people are needing help with. And so that's the email right there. And so that brings us to the next part. So now I'll talk about what is the challenge, how does it work? So basically, it's an effort to try to get volunteers looking at their hemlocks, checking for HWA, especially in those sort of survey gap areas that Carolyn was showing in her map. So trying to get more people looking where HWA is and helping us monitor it in places where we need help. And so the way to participate is the prep work for volunteers is to get set up with IMAP and learn how to identify hemlocks and HWA. So many of you on this call have probably done both of those things already, or you're working on it. So you just got a training on how to identify hemlocks and HWA, for example, and later we'll do IMAP. And so the challenge runs from now until March 15th. So we're kind of focusing on that ideal survey season, like Carolyn showed. So the showy woolly masses are out during this time period, and it's kind of the best time to look. And so the way to participate is basically 3 steps. So you have to first find hemlocks in your area or go out to a new area, check for signs of HWA, so looking for hemlock health indicators, um, but especially looking for those woolly masses on the undersides of twigs, and then reporting to IMAP. And we're asking people to report presence or not detected. So whenever you go out and survey, you can always report back to IMAP, even if you didn't find anything. That not detected data is really, really helpful. For instance, in those kind of survey gap areas, knowing that somebody checked and didn't find it is very helpful information because it gives us a better idea of what's going on there. And so after March 15th, the person who surveys the most sites based on the IMAP data will win a prize from the Hemlock Initiative, and that'll include a hat with the Hemlock Initiative logo and a little certificate saying that you won the competition, and mostly it gives you the pride and bragging rights. So I just wanted to give a brief thank you to our winners from last year. So we had some really dedicated volunteers, Caroline and Bill, and then we also had some other volunteers in Central New York and Western New York who were kind of leading efforts in their communities. And we got a lot of reports in several prisms, including Finger Lakes, the Adirondacks, Capital Region, and Western New York. Um, and I just want to note that we're also focusing on new volunteers this year. So I do know that our volunteers from last year are still reporting HWA at this point, but for winners of the challenge, we'll kind of disqualify them for this year just so they don't win twice in a row, and we'll pick our winners from volunteers who have not won before. And I just wanted to talk about those survey gaps. So Carolyn showed this map earlier in her presentation, shows you where there are lots of hemlocks. So as you can see, the Adirondacks, Tug Hill region, Southern Tier, Catskills, kind of the hot spots for hemlock in New York State. And then I am crudely putting on top of this the municipalities with documented HWA. And like Carolyn pointed out, there are some areas here where we do have lots of hemlocks and they're close to known observations of HWA, but we don't have observations of HWA there yet. So these are kind of really the most important areas to survey where we really need help and want to get a really good idea of what's happening. So you can see there's the Southern Tier in Western New York, kind of the Central New York region, the Tug Hill region, and then the Southern Adirondacks especially are the areas where they're close to known HWA and there's a lot of hemlocks there. And so we've kind of translated that into counties, so survey gap counties, and surveys in these counties for this challenge will basically count double. So you'll have double the chance to get the prize in the end if you're doing surveys in these counties, if you either live there or if you can make your way out to one of these counties. And you can always check back on that map at our website. And so one question we often get is how many records should I take? So say you're going out on the trail and you see thousands of, or maybe dozens of trees. Some of them have hemlock, Willia deligid. Should you be dropping points everywhere? So just to give some guidance. So if you're at a trail and you are surveying for HWA and you don't find it anywhere, you don't necessarily need to drop 1 point at every single tree that you see, because that would be a lot of work for you. So one way to go about it would be to just do 1 point at the trailhead, not detected, a second point as far as you go down the trail, so a second not detected. And if you wanted, you could mark a large stand or two in the middle if you found a significant stand of hemlock and you want to document it. But in general, you only need 1 or 2 not detecteds for each site that you survey. You don't need to drop a point for every tree. If you do detect HWA, so if you're encountering infested stands, so stands with dozens of trees, lots of hemlock woolly delegate on the trees, we really only need 1 point per stand. So it's not necessary to create an IMAP record for every single individual tree in a stand. We really just need that coarser stand level data. And you can note in your record that it's part of a stand. There are 12 trees, they're all infested, that sort of information. But if you did report every single tree, that kind of puts a lot of work on our partners like Carolyn and some people at the DEC who have to review and confirm these records. So we really appreciate the data and we need the data, but it's important to report that data in a way where we're getting a reasonable number of observations for the infestations that we're seeing. So generally just 1 point per stand. And there's not really an exact number of records per site that you should be trying to limit yourself to. It's kind of just a judgment call. You want to try to capture the survey you did in as few a number of records as makes sense for you. So it could be 5 records, it could be 2 records, but just remember that the winner will be determined by sites rather than number of records. So I just say don't try to game the system and report 50 trees in one hike because we'll kind of base it on site. I did also want to make a note on winter safety. So I'll be very brief here. The main thing we want to recommend is that people stay within your comfort zone. So we're not asking people to go do something out of their comfort zone on our account. If you want to get more into winter hiking, that's totally great. We just encourage you to do that safely. Look up how to do that safely. We are not asking you to do that on our part. We're asking you to do whatever fits within your comfort zone right now. But some things to think about are you want to be mindful of the weather, any storms coming through, when does the sun rise and when does the sun set. So it can get dark pretty early here this time of year, so you might want to make sure you go out on your hike before 2 p.m., for example, because you might get stuck out there as it starts to get dark and cold. Be mindful of any rules or regulations. For instance, are you in a state park? Are you in the Adirondacks? There are different rules and regulations that apply. Choose trails wisely. So in general, we'd recommend sticking to kind of shorter trails than what you might be used to doing in the summer, trails that are familiar to you, because the winter kind of always adds an added element of difficulty. And I wanted people to be aware of the concept of 10 essentials. That's one way to think about being safe on winter hikes. So that's something put out by the Green Mountain Club in Vermont. So it covers things like making sure you're hydrated, so bringing water, making sure you have food, warm clothing, a flashlight in case it gets dark. And one tip we wanted to share for navigation. I know most of us use maps on our phone now, but phones can run out of battery and die. Paper maps don't do that. So paper map is always a really good backup and a compass too. And for more info, I'll include links to this stuff in a follow-up email and on our website. But I'll also include a link to a segment on the Adirondack Forest Pest Hunters training from a few weeks ago where they cover this in a little bit more detail. And before going on to the next session, I'll stop for questions in a second too. But I just did want to say that thank you to our volunteers who are already submitting data. We already have over 100 HWA surveys, including presence and not detected. Just from when the challenge started, February 1st. A lot of these are coming from some of our winners from last year. So don't be intimidated. You can still get yourself in the running, even though there's already data being collected. And I will quickly mention on this map, this is including unconfirmed right now. So for example, in the Adirondacks, don't freak out from that point in there. I'm pretty sure that is actually not correct, and uh, our partners are reviewing the photos and trying to make a final decision on that. And that's just kind of all part of the process of IMAP. So even if you're not 100% sure it's Hemlock Willia Delgid, we have this review process set in place so that you can still submit the record and we can review it. And it's still great to get that information just in case it is Hemlock Willia Delgid. And I was also going to mention just to check back on our webpage for a live dashboard throughout the challenge to kind of see what's being reported across the state and how you might stack up in the competition. But that's not live yet. I'm waiting for a little bit more data before publishing that. And so the next section, before talking about how to actually use IMAP, I was going to give some plugs to volunteer opportunities across the state. And before that, I will look at the questions. So, questions about the, oops, I just lost the chat again. There we go. So there's a question about there being a list of the counties. Sure, I can, right now it's just the map, but we could make that into a list. And then a comment from Carolyn, looks like maybe there's some places missing on the map. So maybe I should highlight another county or two to capture those Finger Lakes ravines that are not showing up on the map. But we can look into that later. Let's see. So now I'll get into the next section. And so I just wanted to highlight volunteer opportunities across the state. So for anyone on the call not familiar with the PRISM network, that's PRISM, Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management. New York State is divided into these 8 regions, which each have a couple of dedicated staff that do a lot of great work, education and outreach, leading management, working with networks of partners within their region. And one of the many things that they do is lead volunteer efforts and work with volunteers to survey invasive species. So I'll just, and some of them have HWA specific projects going on right now. So I'll just kind of go around in a circle, starting with the Northeast. So SLELO, St. Lawrence Eastern Lake, Ontario, they have 2 volunteer programs right now related to Hemlock Willia Delgid. And I will leave it at that right now because Megan Pistolese is actually here. So in a minute, I'll hand it over to her to give more detail on that. But now I'll go into the others. And I should mention beforehand, so I didn't put links to any of these on the slide because it's a lot of links and would be hard to kind of capture those links. So instead, we have our website, which is going to be the one-stop shop where you can get to any of these volunteer projects. So I will include links in the follow-up email with more information. So I just did SLELO. Next is Western New York PRISM. They work with volunteers as well. So there will be a link to connect with them. And as you saw on the map earlier, there's a lot of really important places to survey in Western New York, particularly in sort of the southern half where there are hemlocks, but not many reports of Hemlock Willia Delgid at least. And then next would be Finger Lakes. So Finger Lakes has a volunteer HWA survey going on. I think they actually have they have webinars every once in a while, and I think one is coming up this week. So anyone in the Finger Lakes could try to join that initiative. Next is the Catskill region. So the Catskill Regional Invasive Species Partnership, CRISP for short. They work with volunteers as well. So they're a great group to work with if you're in the Catskills. Next is the Lower Hudson region. So they have this EcoQuest program where each month there's a different species that's focused. That there's a different species that the EcoQuest focuses on, and volunteers go out and report those. Oftentimes they use iNaturalist, but this month it is HWA and iMapInvasives is the reporting tool. Um, so anyone from the Lower Hudson will try to send you to that project. Long Island. From the hemlock map before, you might have seen there's not too many hemlocks on Long Island, and hemlock leodelgid is known on most of the hemlocks there. So HWA is not typically one of their primary focuses, but there are lots of volunteer opportunities on Long Island as well. So I encourage people to check that out too. Capital Region Prism is the Prism in the Capital Region, and they work with volunteers as well. And then there's the Adirondack Forest Pest Hunters program, which is run by APIP. That was launched a couple weeks ago and is running, I think theirs runs to like March 15th. So I'll certainly link out to that effort as well. And then, so those are the regional ones, the regional opportunities. But there are also some statewide opportunities. So the Hemlock Initiative has a couple community science programs, which you can learn about on their website, including My Hemlock, Hemlock Hunters, and HWA Hunters, and HWA Phenology Project. And again, I'll try to link people to those efforts that interest them in a follow-up email and on our website. And so now I will hand it over to Megan to give a little bit more detail on the volunteer project in SLELO.
Great. Thanks so much, Mitch, for having me here today. So as mentioned, I'm going to share 2 volunteer opportunities that you can get involved in with SLELO Prism. Next slide. So the volunteer opportunities that I'll be sharing with you today, they're intended for those who live within the 5 counties of Oneida, Oswego, Jefferson, Lewis, and St. Lawrence, which is identified by the green on this map. And I'd also like to mention that HWA has been confirmed present in Oswego County and appears to be moving along the eastern Lake Ontario shoreline. There is a larger portion of the SLELO region that is within the blue area showed earlier in Carrie's map there, where more data is needed for HWA surveys. Next slide. So the first opportunity I'll share is our Invasive Species Volunteer Surveillance Network, or VSN. And the purpose of the VSN is to enhance early detection efforts for priority invasive species when their populations are small enough to eradicate and contain. By joining the VSN, you'll be trained to recognize these priority aquatic and terrestrial species in the SLELO region and report observations to iMapInvasives. And the trainings run about an hour long, and they are taken virtually, and they are offered with flexible availability. You'll also be asked to visit hiking trails and waterways to monitor for the presence of the priority species each season. And to sign up, you can join the VSN and schedule a training. Just visit the URL in the chat. I'm going to grab that here. Or you can scan that QR code that you see on the screen. And as mentioned, Mitch is going to send a follow-up email as well. Next slide. Thank you. And another opportunity to volunteer with SLELO is our virtual hike challenge, which runs annually from November through March. And the challenge is self-led, and it encourages you to go on hikes and to check hemlock trees for signs of HWA, report observations to IMAP, and then to just share your experience on social media using the hashtag virtual hike challenge in your post. And the rules for the challenge are to fill out a form found on the webpage where you can register, and you can win prizes if you sign up. You can scan that QR code or visit this link in the chat to sign up. And prizes are going to be mailed throughout the duration of the challenge to those who sign up to take the challenge. Then you just take a hike You can choose any trail located in the counties that I mentioned earlier, Oneida, Oswego, Jefferson, Lewis, and St. Lawrence. Or we have a map that's featured on that webpage that I shared that has suggested trails where we know that there's hemlocks that are really close to the path of the public trail, so you'll find them pretty easily. So you can also choose to visit those. A lot of them are in the Tug Hill region, which is absolutely gorgeous. So they're really nice trails to visit, and they're easy to hike and easy to find. That's the biggest thing. You won't get lost finding those trails. And then we're just asking you to check the hemlocks that you encounter while you're on that hike, and then report both positive and negative observations to IMAP. And then lastly, to help raise awareness by just sharing a photo of your survey experience on social media and using that hashtag virtual hike challenge in that post. So I hope you'll consider joining some of these volunteer opportunities with SLELO. And again, the links to these opportunities are also going to be available on iMap's HWA Challenge webpage. And I'm available to answer questions if there are any. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Megan. So yeah, I'll just show that one slide with everything one more time. So if you are in, so think about which prism you're in and take a mental note, and I'll connect you with the links in a follow-up email. But I hope many of you consider joining one of these volunteer projects. And so the last thing on the agenda today is using iMapInvasives, but I'm going to take a quick chat break again. So I know that Carolyn is going to have to sign off pretty soon. So any questions about hemlocks or HWA, please enter those into the chat now. And we can try to address those before IMAP. Or if it takes you a minute to type them in, perhaps Carolyn can try to answer in the chat during the IMAP presentation. I'm going to add Carolyn as a presenter again, just in case any questions do come through. But it looks like no questions for now, so I'm going to switch gears and go through how to use IMAP in the last 15 minutes or so of our webinar. So if I will be here beyond 11, so if I get through the IMAP training and there are questions about IMAP, or you need me to go over something again more slowly, we can do that at 12. Sorry. And I did just see one question about the rules. I will have to double check, but I believe I gave the basic rules on the HWA webpage, but I will have to double check that. So essentially the only rules are okay, so looks like I maybe didn't publish the most recent update of the webpage. So I'll have to do that after the webinar today. But basically the only rules are just to report your findings to IMAP, and that the people who report the most sites based on the IMAP data will be the winners. It's pretty simple. The only part that might cause some confusion is that we're basing it on sites rather than reports. So if you report 50 trees on one hike, that won't count more than someone who reported 5 records on their hike. So we're kind of basing it on this site-by-site basis. But I'll try to highlight that on the website better. So now I'll just go through a quick training on how to actually use IMAP. So so for anyone who's not familiar, IMAP is the invasive species database for New York State. It's used by professionals as well as volunteers. Anybody can use IMAP. It's what people like Carolyn use to keep track of where HWA is being reported across the state. And it's what we use for volunteers to contribute their observations. And it's also what PRISM staff like Megan use. So the first step is to go to our webpage at nyimapinvasives.org and click the login button or the create account button at the bottom and sort of the middle of the page. And that'll bring you to the IMAP account page where you can either log in or create a new account if you don't have one. So if you have an account, log in. There is a forgot password button if you haven't logged in a long time. And so use that if you have an account, but if you don't have an account, you can create one in the sign up box. So just enter your information, the email you want to use, create a password, and for jurisdiction, select New York. And when you click join, you'll get a little message. Basically, your account is created, but it's not active yet. So you have to make sure to take that last step and activate your account. So you'll get an email to whatever email you put in, and there will be a user agreement that you have to agree to. There's a link to that in the email. So you need to just read that and agree to the user agreement, and then your account will be active and you'll be ready to go. One thing that sometimes happens is people don't see that email. You could check your spam or your junk folder if you don't see it. Sometimes people set up an account a long time ago and never forgot to activate it at that point. So they can't get in now. So if you have any issues, just contact us if you're not seeing that activation link in your inbox. But hopefully most of you get in with no problems. So you log into IMAP and this is what you should basically see. And so just to give you an idea of what's on the website, there's a main menu where you can look at species lists and stuff like that. You can navigate the map using tools on the left-hand side or just clicking around on the map and zooming in and zooming out. There are action tools on the top. For instance, you can create records online. And then there are layers to turn on and off on the right-hand side. But this is all more advanced tools if you are interested in them. You don't necessarily have to deal with the functionality of the website if you just want to submit records of HWA while you're out on hikes. This is kind of if you want to go and explore and look what data is reported online. So just to clarify that a little bit, there's kind of a couple main components of the IMAP platform. So I just talked a bit about the web interface. So that's where you can see all the records, all the data in IMAP, filter on species you're interested in. You can also submit data. So you can enter points, lines, or polygons for presence not detected or treatment records. So lots of functionality, but it of course requires connectivity. So you need to be connected to the internet. It's a website. So not ideal if you want to go out on the trail and report some quick points to show where you checked for HWA. So for that sort of thing, we have the mobile app. So this is built for quick data collection, points only for presence or not detected, and you can use it out on the trail when you don't have internet connectivity. So you need internet to get set up to like download the app and put your username in, but then you can use it out on the trail. And then you do also need to upload it when you have internet connectivity again. But you can go out on the trail, collect as many records as you want, store those all on your phone, and then upload those when you get back home. So, and regardless of which way you enter records, they all go into IMAP and they all trigger email alerts and are available on the map. And so I'll talk for the next 10 minutes about how to use the mobile app. So for anyone who doesn't have it, please go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and download the iMapInvasives app. Just search iMapInvasives. And you can feel free to follow along. I'll give people a second to download that, and I'll just give another thank you to Carolyn and Megan. I know Carolyn will have to switch to another meeting in a minute, so I just wanted to thank both of our presenters today for presenting and sharing your knowledge. And also, as people are downloading the IMAP app, I just wanted to give a brief reminder that good photos are essential. So when you report Hemlock woolly adelgid, once it hits IMAP, email alerts go out to people who have them set up. So people like Carolyn, people like our friends at DEC who monitor Hemlock woolly adelgid data will see your records. And the main thing they want to be able to do is tell whether, yes, this is Hemlock woolly adelgid, or no, this is something else. So we don't mind getting reports of spider egg sacs or some other lookalike, as long as we can easily tell and make the determination. So for instance, the blurry photos on the left, I believe those are HWA, but it's kind of hard to tell because it's so blurry. But on the right-hand side, you can see much more clearly that those are white woolly egg masses, and they're on the undersides of the twigs. They're on the twig at the base of the needles. They're not sitting on the middle of the needle like some other lookalikes. So some tips for getting a good picture are putting your hand behind a twig can kind of help your camera focus, can give it some scale. We know that you can't necessarily control lighting or wind, so we just ask people to do your best, take a couple pictures if you have to. You can only submit one with your IMAP record, but you can always save a couple pictures in case someone reaches out to you to try to get more information on the observation. And so this is kind of the basic workflow of the app. You have to set up the app and connect it to your account while you have internet connectivity, but then you're free to go out on the trail and record as many observations as you need while you're not connected to internet. It'll just use your phone's GPS. And then the third and final step is to upload your observations. So once you get home from your hike, you have to upload your records to IMAP while you have internet connectivity again. And then, so the setup is kind of a one-time thing. That's what I'll go through now. And then you kind of just cycle between steps 2 and 3. You go out, record observations, upload them to IMAP, go out, record observations, upload those to IMAP, etc. So for setting up your mobile app, when you open up the app for the first time, you should be brought to this preferences page. If you've opened it up before, you'll be brought to a blank green page with some options at the top. If you want to get back to that preferences page to set up your preferences, you go to the main menu and select preferences. So at this point, we should all be on this preferences page. And basically, the main thing to do is to just enter these 3 basic pieces of information and click Retrieve IMAP lists. So select New York if you're collecting data in New York, so you get our species list. For instance, Hemlock woolly adelgid will be on that list. And then enter your username, which is just your email address, and then type in your password from the IMAP account you just created. And then you can click Retrieve IMAP lists, and hopefully you get this green success message. If you are getting something else, it's because some error happened. So you might be getting a red error message, for example. So it's really important that your username and password that you enter in the app match what you put in your online account when you set up your account. So one thing that happens is sometimes people create their account but don't activate it. So when they go and try to put their account information in the app, it doesn't quite work because there's no active account yet. So just make sure your account's active and that you can sign in online, resolve any account issues, and then try again. And you can always reach out to us if anything like that occurs. And one tip is on some older iPhones, sometimes it thinks you're typing a sentence when you put in the password, so make sure it's not adding in a space. But eventually you should be able to get to this green success message, and that's pretty much the only essential thing you have to do to set up. So from once you've done that, you are technically ready to go out into the field and collect observations. But there are a couple features you can look into if you're interested. So you could create a custom species list. You could put HWA on it. You can also add fake species. That's the species we have set up for testing. And then there's all sorts of other settings, but the defaults are typically fine. And whenever you change settings, make sure to click Save. And so that brings us to the next step, which is recording observations. So again, you can do this when you're not in connectivity anymore. So click the Add Observation button on the main IMAP screen. And anyone on the call is free to follow along. Even if you don't have any invasive species right in front of you, you can always submit records using a fake species to just kind of get used to the functionality before you actually go out and do it for the real thing. So the first thing you'll be prompted to do after you click Add Observation is take a photo. So you can either take a photo within the app or select a photo from your library. And if you select a photo from your library, it will actually grab the location data from that photo. And you can turn your custom species list on if you have one. And then the most important things you do, so one is the picture, two is select the species. So if you're practicing, choose fake species. If you're participating in the challenge, you'll want to actually report your Hemlock woolly adelgid findings. So one is photo, two is species, three is select detected or not detected. So that just depends whether or not you found the invasive. So that's the key information. One other thing to check is your location. So you should be able to see your little pin on the map, but there are some cases when you won't. So if you're not in connectivity, it might just be a gray map because the imagery is not loading. Or on some Android devices, I think there's a minor bug temporarily where the map is gray as well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that your location's not working. So as long as you have a nice long latitude, longitude at the bottom, that means your record should have the location captured successfully. And it's actually longitude than latitude in our system. And if you're having any issues, it might be a permissions issue. Maybe you need to give the app locations permissions, but usually it works okay. And then when you scroll down beyond that, there are some other fields. If you have an IMAP project or organization, you can put that in. For instance, I think the Volunteer Surveillance Network has an IMAP project, which you would learn about if you join that volunteer project for SLELO. But if you don't know what these are, then you don't have to worry about them, just leave them blank. Time searched can be helpful, so we know how long you checked, and then you can answer any other comments in the comment box. For example, was it a single tree or a stand of trees? That sort of stuff. How severe is the infestation? And always remember to click Save. And so in theory, you can go out into the fields, collect records, don't need internet connection, and then you come back home at the end of the day, and this is when you have to upload your records to IMAP. So any records you collect in the app will show up as a yellow card on the main IMAP screen. And that means they're on your app and they are not in the statewide database yet. So they're there for you to see, but people like PRISM staff and Hemlock Initiative, they cannot see your record yet. So what you want to do is get that online. So you can click the little pencil button if you want to edit something, or you can, if you're ready, then you can click the checkbox. And after you click the checkbox, go to the main menu and select Upload Selected. And that will upload any records where you've checked that box. So if you have 20 records, you could check them all off and then click Upload Selected. There is also a little Select All shortcut, so you don't have to go through and click on every single record. It'll ask you if you're sure, and you say yes, and then you should have a blank screen. It'll load for a minute and then give you a success message, but then you should have a blank screen, and that means your records have left your phone, but they haven't disappeared. They are now on IMAP. And so you could go log into the online version and turn on the unconfirmed layer, and you should be able to see your record. Some errors that might happen here, you might get a message that you don't have good enough internet connection. So just make sure you're connected to your Wi-Fi. But in general, things usually upload just fine. And I'll just make one last emphasis on that. If you have the yellow card on your phone, that means the record is sitting on your device, not in the database yet. So that's what you want to see while you're out on your hike. But once you get home, you really want to get that onto IMAP. So make sure to upload your records, and you should see a nice blank slate when you're done. And just to let you know, there are more advanced functionalities as well. For instance, setting up email alerts or viewing the distribution of certain species. If you want to learn more, you can go to our training page. We have webinars and online training materials. But with that, I know we went 3 minutes over, so I just want to thank everyone so much for your time and for your interest in this challenge. We hope people have fun submitting records, and that everyone stays safe out there and warm. So I will stay on for any questions, but I know many of you might have to head out. But thanks again for joining, and we encourage you to participate in the challenge and stay connected with us through our trainings, social media, and I also have our email and website up there. And I'll also put one last reminder that the main hub for information on this challenge is the HWA page on our website. And I will make sure to double check that and make sure it has the most current information. So I will stop the recording. All right, so I see a comment from Jasmine, who I believe is with the Hemlock initiative. Or no, maybe it's not. So the question is it worth squishing them to see if they're alive, especially as we go through harsh winter weather? Could we put that in the notes if they're alive? I would say to most volunteers, that's generally not needed. It's more about just getting the information at this point rather than having to do any more detailed assessment than that. But there is the notes section. If you are someone who has more knowledge on Hemlock Willia delicate, or you're doing surveys for the Hemlock Initiative, then you can enter more detailed notes such as that. But for volunteers, it's mostly just about presence and absence. And Megan asked if anyone online is volunteer with SLELO. It looks like I know we had a small group today and people have dropped off, so perhaps not. All right, with that, I think I will close out the webinar. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Thanks to Megan for presenting.